Good afternoon, and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where your team needs it most. My name is Bryan Gilbert, the Deputy Director here at NCIA, and as always, I'm very excited to welcome all of our dedicated network of members and supporters back to another edition of our member-driven Committee Insights series today. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by a number of leading clinical, regulatory, and cannabis technology experts for a very pertinent program presented by NCIA's Scientific Advisory Committee entitled Cannabis and COVID-19, What We Know and What We Don't. During today's conversation, the panel will lead the audience through a detailed review of the effects of COVID-19 on the body with an additional focus on a number of assorted research topics related to cannabis-based treatments. Well, we've got a great presentation lined up, so let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome our moderator for today's program, Jim Makosa, CEO of Flow Technology, as well as the director at Lucid Lab Group. Welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials. Jim, always great to see you here virtually. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, Brian. Really appreciate what you and everyone on your team does over at NCIA. I've been a member for coming up on 7 years now. And as Brian mentioned, I've been in the industry for 8 years. I run a couple of companies here based in Seattle, Washington. Big cannabis enthusiast. I chair the Scientific Advisory Committee and am fortunate to work with great scientists and professionals, some of which you'll hear today. Brian mentioned, we are focusing on cannabis and COVID-19, what we know and what we don't know, and we're going to address it from a few different perspectives that we'll get into shortly. Dr. Layfeld.
Thank you very much, fearless leader Makoso. I am happily his vice chair on the Scientific Advisory Committee. My name is Paloma Layfeld. I am a physician and the Senior Director of Clinical Science and Partnerships at Goodness Growth Holdings. We are the only physician-founded and physician-led cannabis company currently active in 5 states with a robust and incredibly important research portfolio with a focus on chronic pain in medical cannabis patients. So excited to be a part of this webinar today. We're going to address some of the studies that a lot of non-science people have been pinging about, and hopefully you'll walk away and be able to talk about them as well on this incredibly pertinent and amazing topic. Thank you, NCIA, so much for doing this. I would now love to kick it to my colleague, Dr. Postolov.
Hello, everybody, and it's my privilege and honor to be a part of this wonderful, exciting group and to be a part of NCIA. My background is from Western medicine. I got my first medical degree and specialty in neurology from Russia. You hear about Russia these days a lot. And while practicing Western medicine, I got introduction to Chinese medicine. So I got in Russia and later in United States, my master's and doctoral degree in Eastern medicine. As you know, cannabis is coming from China and India originally. So I'm very proud and excited to be a part of today's presentation. Thank you. And the next
hello.
one is Bryan.
Thank you, Dr. Postolov. Hi, everyone. Thanks you all for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this fantastic webinar on today. I want to thank NCIA for allowing us to put it on. I'm Bryan Godfrey. I'm a partner with the law firm of Foley Hoag. As part of my practice, I advise FDA regulated companies with respect to various regulatory, compliance, and enforcement matters affecting them and their products at all phases of the product life cycle. And it also includes counseling cannabis-derived product manufacturers.
Great. So we're going to give you an overview. Thank you. We're going to give you an overview generally of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to give a little bit of a background on where we're at with COVID-19 at the moment in terms of a little bit about the pathology, which the scientists and doctors will give you a little bit more flavor on that. Some of the epidemiology associated with the illness that's been tracked for the last couple of years, the endocannabinoid system, then the related research, both both in vitro and some of the clinical research that's out there, given that we have a clinician on. And then we're going to talk a little bit about post-COVID effects, long COVID, anxiety, sleep disorders, etc., before wrapping it up with a regulatory picture on those that are potentially thinking about producing products or are currently producing products that are being used for therapeutic use, specifically related to COVID-19. Before we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. Feel free, attendees, to ask your questions in the Q&A area of the session. You'll find that on the bottom of your screen all the way to the right where it says Q&A with a little bubble. And I will be monitoring those throughout the talk, and we'll leave about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the session to address those. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot. You can see this is a little bit dated. It's from last week. And so the numbers are slightly higher, but this gives you an idea of kind of where we're at over the last 2 years that we've been tracking COVID-related cases. Cumulative cases total, and this is worldwide, is about 430 million cases with a 7-day rolling average of 1.92 million. But, obviously the big number, and this is why we as a society are taking it so seriously, is, this cumulative death rate of just under 6 million people who have unfortunately lost their lives. And, obviously that's a huge tragedy, but also the families that are affected by that. And so, this is, as we all know, a really large pandemic, and it's still ongoing. And certainly us as professionals are trying to do everything we can to understand it and see maybe where our industry specifically has applications for potentially helping to treat or educate around cannabis use related to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So this wonderful macro image is, a microscopic view of this virus. I'm sure many of you have already seen it. And what is it exactly? What is this virus? What is this illness? And so a really kind of watered down definition: coronavirus disease 19, abbreviated COVID-19, is caused by the novel severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, abbreviated SARS-CoV-2. And this virus infects humans by utilizing its spike surface protein to bind to ACE2, which is an enzyme found in cells of all different types throughout the body. And due to the inflammatory response to the infection differing so widely, a lot of that is attributed to these cells being found in many places throughout the body, and obviously everybody's body reacting differently to this virus. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of different cell types in different areas in the body where the ACE2 enzyme specifically can be found. And Dr. Layfelt is going to go over a little bit more about in depth about these things. Dr. Layfelt.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. Before we jump into the incredibly sexy cannabis and COVID research, I do want to spend some time on the endocannabinoid system. I did see that there were some of my healthcare provider colleagues on the call, but for those of you not familiar, the endocannabinoid system is an organ system in almost every single animal's body. It's not in the insect's body, but it's in almost all mammalian bodies. And it is responsible for homeostasis, which is just a fancy word for balance in the body. This cell, I mean, you don't have to be an anatomist to really look at these pictures and see that the CB1 and CB2, which are receptors, which serve as the lock to that key of either internal cannabinoids known as endocannabinoids or plant medicine cannabinoids that serve as the key and bind to these receptors. Again, but you can really see that they're incredibly widespread throughout the body. A vast oversimplification of that is that the CB1 receptors are mostly in the central nervous system, which includes the brain. And the CB2 receptors, which Dr. Postolov will go into a little bit more, is all around our immune system. So this is obviously super significant for the clinical effects and potential treatment modalities for the SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 virus. It's in our spleen, a huge immune organ, as well as our immune cells, our white blood cells that are really important for fighting off that virus. And people that have a disbalance or a deficiency in endocannabinoids have been hypothesized to experience COVID symptomatology different compared to control. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just wanted to review the endocannabinoid system in the context of disease states. We can go to the next slide. This is just one of my favorite slides ever as a former neuroscientist, researcher. This is a picture of some of the cells in our nervous system. And again, you can see that those cannabinoid receptors are rampant throughout our nervous system as well. And this is significant because COVID, we all hear of long COVID, and some of the really detrimental symptoms that people who've experienced COVID are now facing even after having the virus, a year later. And this is, again, another potential pharmacological, treasure trove that we really haven't utilized for the treatment of some of these immune altering diseases. Those blue buttons in the middle are neurons. I think we're all familiar with neurons and the chemical messengers in between. And then the ones on the left and the right of those neurons are known as glial cells. Again, microglia are kind of I call them the Pac-Man, the trash cans of the brain, and their different cell lines throughout our body known as macrophages. And what they do is they eat up those bacteria, those viruses in our body that are really infectious. And again, they have that CB2 receptor on them. You can see that little squiggly line there. So just a brief review of that. And now we'll get into some of the research. I mean, if I had $1 for those of you in the industry, I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing for, some non-cannabis people that texted me, Dr. Paloma, if I smoke a joint, am I going to be cured of COVID, or I'm not going to get COVID? The answer is no, unfortunately, to everyone, but we're going to go into some of the science of this article. It's available everywhere. If you just Google it, you can pull it up and you can share it with your friends and go through it. We'll kind of break it down. And Jim really laid a great background on some of the proteins that are on our cell surfaces and are on the COVID, the virus that causes COVID as well. So I want to spend some time on this just to talk about spike proteins. Corona, so this is Coronaviridae family. Corona, for those of you who remember Spanish or are native speakers, corona means crown, which is what the virus looks like, right? It has all these little spike proteins, and it looks like the virus is literally wearing a crown. It's a positive sense RNA virus, not significant. But what's significant here is that for antiviral medications, any part of the virus infecting the human cell, whether it's from cell entry to integration into the cell, is a treatment for antiviral medication. So this is what all the virologists are studying right now to really get that treatment that is so necessary. So again, any step, and that includes cell entry, genome replication, viral maturation, and viral release. And so in this case, in this particular study that we're talking about right now, we're going to focus again on that spike protein, which binds to that ACE receptor on many, many human cells in our body. I use that lock and key again, but we'll do it in this case too. We have that ACE receptor on almost all of our cell surfaces. I mean, look at this picture if you want to talk about clinical significance of COVID, right? I mean, we have ACE receptors on our lungs, our upper airway. We clinicians really, have seen over and time again, the respiratory symptoms, the X-ray signs that are really associated with COVID. And that's because that spike protein binds to that ACE receptor, ACE2 receptor on our lungs. It's also available rampant in our brain as well. There are a lot of neurological symptoms associated with COVID. It's on our blood vessels. Again, very significant. We see a lot of patients that are having blood clots. So again, unfortunately, we have so many different areas that this virus is really able to latch onto and infect us. And you can relate all of these ACE receptor locations to clinical symptoms that are associated with the virus. We can go on to the next. So knowing all of that, this is a super busy slide. I just want you to focus on the first line there. This is called affinity mass spectrometry. It's basically just highlighting certain areas of certain molecules in order to really understand and see how they work. So the spike protein actually has different parts of it. It's called a trimer in this case because it has 3 different parts. Again, if you focus on the A line, those balls at the bottom are known as the S1 subunit. And that S1 subunit is actually what's responsible for binding that part specifically to that ACE receptor on the cell surface. So that's what this study specifically studied. So again, as viral, in order to beat the virus, it's important that we know exactly what protein we're targeting. So in this case, we're using specific cannabinoids, which we'll go over as well, that potentially would bind to that S1 subunit, which would bind to our cell surface if it wasn't neutralized. So in this case, they're, in the cannabinoid plant, we can go to the next slide here. Thank you, Brian. In the cannabinoid plant, there are hundreds of active molecules. We're talking cannabinoids, which we're familiar with, terpenes, triterpenes, flavonoids. There are so many different molecules. And again, these are all potential therapeutic agents. So in this case, many of the cannabinoids were studied, and the ones that had the highest affinity for that S1 subunit on the spike protein were 2 acidic cannabinoids known as cannabigerolic acid and cannabidiolic acid. So that's the top. Organic chemistry is never my favorite, but it looks a lot scarier than it actually is. If you go to the top, I call this if you go to the top, this is kind of I call it the family tree of cannabinoids. Cannabigerolic acid is where all of these other cannabinoids are coming from, right? You can see that. In order for it to convert to one of our favorites, THCA, it has to use an enzyme and then a heat. With CBDA, same thing, enzyme, heat, and CBG, you just do heat. So this is significant because, as we said at the beginning, just smoking a joint, taking a bong rip, is this going to cure COVID? Absolutely not. Because in order for them to get to that CBD, to that THC, and to that CBG, you need to apply heat. You need to decarboxylate the acid in order to do so. In this study specifically, the 2 cannabinoids that were found to bind to the spike unit specifically were those 2 acidic forms. You know that they're acidic from this chart because they have that A there, which stands for the acid. So we can go to the next one. This is the best slide because it's showing, you can see, again, you don't have to be a lab person to see the difference between the 3 images here. These are representing the neutralization of that spike protein. What they did is they studied epithelial cells, which are cells that line almost all surfaces of our bodies, our organs, our urinary tract, as well as our skin, and all have ACE receptors on them. And they found that, there's a significant difference between CBDA and CBGA on that spike protein. So this is certainly the picture that I would share with your curious friends on here. But again, that neutralization of the spike protein occurs with these acidic cannabinoids, which is incredibly awesome. So limitations of this study, and these are just some of the very small clinical studies that be done on CBGA and CBDA. I do want to mention that because we have to talk about this every time, because of that Schedule I status of cannabis, it's virtually impossible to perform randomized control trials in the United States, which is a complete disservice to the millions of patients that have really benefited from cannabis. However, in this study specifically, this is something called in vitro, meaning it was done in the lab setting. Again, it's incredibly hard to perform clinical studies with a Schedule I substance, which is something that NCIA is completely not for. We need to deschedule so we can really see if these have clinical implications in human beings. It's imperative that we do this 5 years ago. But again, there are other ways that we can really get those clinical studies, which we'll also talk about, and that's through performing these studies internationally and also observational studies, which are nothing to poo-poo. I do, and Dr. Postolov will talk about some other studies here. I do want to say that I did listen to a podcast and someone said, yeah, if you do smoke cannabis, it will actually, decrease your chances of getting COVID. And that's because if you get couch lock, you're not going to leave your house and be exposed to the COVID. So just remember that. I'll go ahead and kick it to Dr. Postolov to tell us some more about some cannabis in COVID research.
Thank you, Dr. Leifert, for your brilliant presentation. And kind of the summary of all of it, as I put it on my Instagram when this last study came out, I put the post that a joint a day will not keep your COVID away. And however, today in my presentation, I want to talk about cannabis-based research and our quest for looking for therapeutic approach in COVID-19. Specifically, it will be addressing endocannabinoid system in our immune system and in our central nervous system, brain and spine. So in this first slide, I'm not ready, sorry. In this first slide, I want to say that a lot of different doctors all over the world right now are looking for treatment for COVID. And at this point, all they can offer is antiviral, plasma, immunotherapy, antibiotics, oxygen therapy, and others. But researchers all over the world, and especially in Israel, Canada, Italy, Romania, and other foreigner countries doing a tremendous amount of research. We in the United States very much behind. That's why most of my scientific articles will be double-blind, peer review, published in a very serious, reputable magazines and journals. However, we don't have really good research in the United States, which would help us to prove how cannabinoids help us fighting on many different levels with this horrible COVID pandemic. So this slide shows that our immune system is quite a complicated system itself. And we have immune cells in different organs. We have them in lymph nodes, in bone marrow, in our thymus, in our glands, and in many, many other organs. And of course, in many blood cells. What is the immune system? Basically, the immune system is our first defense mechanism. We all are born with the immune system, and the immune system we are born with is called innate immune system. So that's what the baby gets from his mother, basically. Then as the baby growing and gets all sorts of different infections, viruses, toxins, the child and then human adult develops another immune system, which called adaptive system. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is kind of very scary slide because it shows us a lot of different cells in our blood and in our immune system. But what I see as a remarkable system that we all have pre-programmed cannabinoid receptors within our immune system. So it would be ridiculous not to use something what Mother Nature already gave us. And in our immune system, we're gonna have mostly CBD2 and sometimes CB1 receptors. And nature is very wise. We got it for a reason. Obviously, probably at the time of Darwin, we didn't know that we're gonna face 2,000 years later this horrible virus called COVID, which is very mysterious and adaptive. But nevertheless, we have that already pre-programmed in our system. And different immune cells will do different functions. Next slide, please. This slide looks a little bit complicated, but it's really not, because what else is very interesting, and Dr. Paloma talked a lot about CB1 and CB2 receptors. but they are working in a also kind of mysterious way. They have ability to stimulate the production of some cells, and at the same time, they can inhibit other cells. And that's again the remarkable, remarkable system which human body already has, and not to use it and not to study it in more aggressive and exciting way would be foolish. Next slide, please. Now, this is also a very interesting study, and it is in vitro. And as we already know, in vitro means it was done in Petri dish. It wasn't done on alive patients. And this is also a study from Italy. But what's interesting in it, that it shows exactly how cannabinoids will work on different stages of cannabis, of COVID in acute state. In my practice, I have to admit, in the last 2 years, I've seen only 4 patients in a really acute stage of COVID, and it was before we learned that COVID does present in the United States. I didn't have a mask at that time, or gloves, or my scrubs, but thank God I didn't get sick from it. So that another proof that if our immune system is strong, it will defend us from being infected. That COVID surprisingly will not affect every single person, because those 3 patients were coughing, had a very high fever and a sore throat, and I was as close as I can be to my sick patients and did not get COVID. So this is the slide which shows how COVID affects different organs, specifically lungs, intestines, and what happens in cytokine storm, which we talk a lot about. And not only it talks about how COVID affects it, it also describes to us how cannabinoids will either reduce inflammation in the lung tissue and reduce the fibrosis in lung tissue, or how it will downregulate the infection in our intestine, and how ACE2 inhibitor receptor will be going into downregulation. And finally, on the left side of the slide, which is most interesting, we know that cytokine storm is when, and it usually happens with young people with a very strong immune system between 25 to 35 years, where their own body, trying to defend themselves from COVID, goes into a very extreme defense mechanism and attacks itself. And you see how few cells, especially macrophages, will help us in this process. Next slide, please. So we were talking about that CB2 receptors are mostly affecting our immune system. But what is happening with our brain with the patients who had COVID? Very, very interesting process. First of all, the frontal lobe of our brain, and you see on this picture on the right where we see CBD receptors in brain in a red color. We're going to have that lobe, frontal lobe, which is responsible for our thinking, for our willpower, for our desire to fight, will be very much infected and affected. Left slide shows, and this is our, it is our gray matter of the brain, and it is a relatively new part of our brain. On the left side slides, we see that not only the new part of the brain will be heavily affected, but also our old brain, amygdala, which is responsible for fight or flight mechanism. That's why so many patients will have anxiety attacks, post-traumatic stress disorder, hypothalamus, thalamus. All those structures are all the structures where we were prepared to fight danger. But what happened in the time of COVID, we were in that kind of danger state for almost 2 years. Some people would have COVID and have post-COVID syndrome. Some of patients would experience just the fear of being infected, being isolated. So COVID in a way played a very dangerous joke to human body. However, I have to say, next slide, please, that as sad to admit it, because we know that so many patients unfortunately died from COVID. COVID also gave us some good experiences because we have the time to think about where are we running every day, where are we in a hurry, in that state, succeed, do, fight. So basically, we were forced to stop and think about it. And for those of us who didn't learn that lesson, unfortunately, after COVID, a lot of patients, and that's what most of my patients I see right now who come to me with COVID, post-COVID syndrome. And in this article, which was done not in vitro, this article was done with real patients. None of them had necessarily, in silico means that it was computer-generated research. And you see on the slide how the brain was affected from normal state to post-COVID state, and how CBD and CBN and other cannabinoids will positively help us to work with post-COVID syndrome. Next slide, please. So what are the main complaints of patients who come to clinic in post-COVID? I would say number one will be depression and lack of energy, fatigue, extreme fatigue, anxiety, loss of smell. A lot of patients will have paresthesia where they have numbness in their hands and feet, memory loss, insomnia, and other super unpleasant symptoms. But statistically right now, patients who went through COVID, up between 80 to 90% are suffering with depression. Next slide, please. So here I combined, and again, it's just a fraction of scientific articles which were published on post-COVID conditions that would mostly include anxiety attacks and depressions. And also what was interesting is the dosage of CBD, which was patients treated with. They found that most patients, unless they had more than 300 milligrams of CBD, would not have significant improvement or effect. Different studies will show different THC content. I personally, as a practitioner, can use only cannabinoid CBD with THC less than 0.3%. But for those who are allowed to do more than 0.3 of THC, they also had very positive results. I like using at least minimal THC content because that helps us to deliver to both CB1 and CB2 receptors. And the last slide, please. It is what and how cannabinoids can help with insomnia, which is also a very difficult side effect of COVID. And from there on, I will ask Dr. Leifeld to continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Postolov. No, when we were kind of putting this together, the four of us, we were talking about if we just wanted to discuss the active part of the disease or really the ramifications that occur post-COVID. And we have to talk about the ramifications. We can go on to the next slide. So, I mean, this study is incredibly concerning. A lot of us are calling this a mental health pandemic on top of a pandemic, because so many people that were infected or with COVID have a new onset mental illness, meaning before being affected with COVID, they did not have a mental illness. Again, 1 in 3 people, this is incredibly significant. And unfortunately, we don't know exactly why. And, single agent pharmaceuticals such as select SSRIs, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, they come with a bevy of really life-altering side effects. And of course, SSRIs work for particular populations, but psychiatrists, neurologists should really be able to have other pharmacological plant-based medicine options in their toolkit to really deal with this new onset of patients that are going to be coming to them for the rest of their careers, to be completely frank. So we know that we have research that shows that cannabidiol specifically really is efficacious with regard to anxiety. Preclinical evidence, observational evidence, international RCTs, and I have a couple of studies that are some of the most in-depth studies that I encourage everyone to kind of put your screens on, look them up, share them with your healthcare providers, because they do really show that cannabidiol has effects to combat anxiety and different types of anxiety. Again, CBD acts on that same system that our serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors act on in a much gentler and different way. We call things mechanism of actions. They both have the effect of increasing serotonin and just do things in different ways. We can go to the next slide. So these are two, and of course, insomnia, which is what we call one of those ancillary symptoms associated with anxiety, with a lot of these long COVID symptoms that unfortunately we're all experiencing. The study on the left is cannabidiol and anxiety and sleep. It's a large observational study. I believe it was done a couple of years ago. And the one on the right is for social anxiety, specifically out of the University of Kyoto. That is such an amazing study. It's a randomized control trial, which is the gold standard of clinical studies, meaning that they had a placebo group versus the group that was taking cannabidiol to aid in social anxiety disorder. And they found statistically significant results that suggest that cannabidiol is incredibly beneficial for the treatment of anxiety. So we're talking about all these effects of cannabidiol and all these other minor cannabinoids on how they could potentially be used as a treatment modality for COVID, for anxiety. So Bryan, our regulatory expert, can I go out and slap a label on my cannabidiol and say this is the cure for COVID?
Not so fast. I would caution against doing that. And thank you, Dr. Leifeld, for the setup there. Particularly because this is an area actually that FDA is heavily monitoring. If any of you have been watching what the FDA has been doing in terms of issuing enforcement letters for CBD products, and not even just CBD products that are making COVID claims, the agency has been issuing letters to those companies. And I just, on the slide here, have included about 3 years worth of data here. 2020, we saw 21 letters issued. And out of those 21 warning letters that were issued, 13 were issued to companies that were making COVID-related claims with respect to their CBD products. 2019, we saw an increase in the number of warning letters that FDA issued. And in 2021, we saw 5 warning letters issued to different companies. So this slide is to let you know that FDA is watching. And I would say from a public health perspective, the agency is taking not just CBD products, but just generally any type of products that are making claims with respect to COVID, and those products have not had authorization, have not come through and gotten their emergency use authorizations or have gotten approval or clearance. FDA is taking swift actions against those companies. Next slide, please. So if you are interested in making therapeutic claims for CBD products, what does that mean, right? So under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it defines a drug as an article that is intended for use in the diagnosis, treatment, cure, or prevention of a disease or condition, or intended to affect the structure or function of the body. Next slide, please. So if you want to make those therapeutic claims, like a claim that puts you into the drug category, there are a host of requirements that you would have to abide by. On the slide here, I'm kind of highlighting some of the main ones, but there are others aside from these. The main one that's in red text is the drug application, getting your relevant application into the agency that they can review and approve. And then also there's registration requirements, product listing requirements, labeling requirements, and of course, GMP requirements as well. Next slide, please. In terms of compliance with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, you say, well, FDA has issued me a letter, so what? So it's a big deal. So many people don't realize that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is not just a public health, an act that for a public health agency. It's actually, it has both civil and criminal penalties attached to it. With respect to making unapproved therapeutic claims, it technically will, and we've seen these in the letters, what FDA has said is that you're making potentially a marketing of an unapproved drug. You're introducing into interstate commerce a misbranded or adulterated drug. You fail to register, which is also a prohibited act. And in terms, if you're committing a prohibited act under the Federal Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, FDA can take a number of actions against you. So if you're a company that are making these claims, you got a letter and then, well, so what? I don't care about it. What FDA can do is they can seize your product and take your product off the market. They can go seek an injunction to enjoin you from selling any of your products. But then they can also reach into their penalty bag if they want to levy civil monetary penalties against you, and then they can go the criminal route as well. So it's a big deal. I wouldn't just say you got a warning letter. It's a cost of doing business. In this space, FDA, if they really wanted to, they could take your products off the market. And in terms of the types of claims that are on FDA's radar, one thing to keep in mind, and this is not legal advice, this is just based upon, you can look at the letters are pretty public, but in any instance, when taken in totality, if your label, including your product's name, or if your website, your marketing materials, or even oral statements that people at your company may be making suggest that the product treats a certain condition or disease, if it cures a certain condition or disease, if it prevents a certain condition or disease, or lessens the impact of a condition or disease, FDA has taken a position that renders your product a drug subject to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And likely you would probably get a letter if they found out about those types of claims. And I believe that's all I have for the FDA piece. Thank you.
Well, Bryan, are you there? Go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, highly encourage everybody to take advantage of the interactive elements of today's program. If you have a question, please do post it in the Q&A board. That'll allow the other audience members to review it, bounce some ideas off themselves, as well as upvote any question that they definitely want the panel to address. So I think we're going to dive right into the Q&A portion of today's program. I'll turn it right back over to Jim. If anything does come in through the chat window or as a comment on the Facebook live stream as well, we'll have our team members populated in here for moderation and consideration too.
Great. Thanks, Bryan. And thank you, everyone who's attending, and potentially if you're watching this on a recording, thanks for tuning in. Obviously, we had a really talented panel here today, and I'm very fortunate to have my name alongside theirs. But maybe one thing we can do, Brooke, I don't know if this is possible. Lloyd Covens has asked a couple of questions in the chat. They're a little bit more detailed. If we can upgrade him to panelist so we can actually ask it live, that'd be great. I know we haven't done that historically, but certainly if you can make that happen, that'd be great, because I can't unpack everything he's trying to ask. While you guys sort that out, just had a question actually for you, Bryan, as a person with experience, working for the FDA for almost a decade, and I don't expect legal advice, and I'm sure none of the attendees do, but what would you recommend someone should do, let's say, if they're manufacturing a product, if they're thinking about marketing to a specific indication or a specific treatment protocol specifically related to COVID? You gave some advice on that last slide, but what in your experience, or maybe what are you telling some of your clients at the moment?
Yeah, so if you're interested in making any type of therapeutic claims, is essentially what the Act says with respect to any product. Doesn't have to be CBD. It's essentially making sure that you have your application into the FDA and got your product approved to make those treatment claims. Anything less than that, and again, this is for clients even outside of the CBD space, anything less than that, FDA is going to say you are making drug claims, you have an unapproved drug product on the market, cease these claims. So it's essentially, and there's also a balancing act too, because we're also, from a policy standpoint, we're wanting to see what FDA is going to do with respect to CBD and a variety of products, not just for therapeutic uses, but also for food dietary supplements. We're in this area where FDA is kind of exercising enforcement discretion on CBD products generally. And to the extent that a company is making quote unquote therapeutic claims, it only heightens the risk that FDA is going to take swift action against you. So if you want to make those therapeutic claims, the advice is not my advice, but the act is the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act says you need to submit and get your NDA and get it approved so you can make your therapeutic claims. Aside from that, steer clear of the therapeutic claims would be my suggestion.
Great, thanks, Bryan. And Lloyd, appreciate you joining us. I see you got a two-part question here, but feel free.
Yeah, this is for Dr. Apostolov. We're concerned that the Canadians looked at Epidiolex and its relationship to that group not having COVID outcomes. And we know it's a small group because Epidiolex is still mostly for child applications, and I don't believe their study looked at that for those under 10. But my question really has to do with dosing. In your slide that looked at some of the research, seemed to be up there in the 500, 600 milligram area, which is sort of unavailable, if you will, over the counter. There you go. Can you comment on what the dosing theory is right now?
Well, I prepared just the summary of different slides from Europe, as you can see, and there are much more research done on that what I presented, because basically I didn't have enough room or time to present more research. But if you look at this data and you look at the results on the findings, that's what you're gonna see. In that column, dosage and length of treatment, you see that most of them were reporting that after 300 milligrams will be helpful. It is not exactly true that the high dosage of CBD is not available. There are CBD which I personally using in my practice are higher than 1,000 and 2,000 milligrams of CBD.
Right.
So high dosage of CBD available. Again, in those tincture, you're gonna have very small percentage of THC. But like I said, In my practice, I'm not interested to make somebody high. I'm using
Right.
THC mostly as a delivery system and as additional activation of both receptors.
To open the receptors.
Yeah,
I was
but
more curious. I'm
I
sorry.
also have to say something here, and Bryan probably will say that it is very true. What I'm sharing today in our conversation, I'm not necessarily putting on my Facebook or on my Instagram because I know that FDA, FCC will come after me for claims.
Sure.
These studies which I published, even that they're not very happy when we're publishing something what was done not in the United States. I've been told many times by actually bank system, if you want our approval, take away all your clinical studies which make these claims and this research. I said, how can I take the research away? Because this research is public knowledge. It exists. Why should I take something away just because it wasn't made in the United States? It doesn't mean it's not existing. People in Canada and Israel worked on these studies for 20 years. We hardly scratching the surface right now. But again, when patients come into my practice and they have post-COVID syndrome, and Western medical doctors unfortunately don't have much to offer for them.
Right.
Yeah, they can put them on Prozac for depression, and they can put them on Ambien for insomnia, for example. But people want somewhat natural, they want holistic approach because I'm integrative medical practitioner. So I do use those products, but again, outside of our circle, I probably not ready to make any statements about
May I
it.
butt in real quick? The problem that we see is that the US media tends to report in chunks. So I'm taking this example, the Oregon State University and the Chicago results and the Canadian results all were reported in January as being very revolutionary, but these studies have been showing these effects for over a year, especially from Israel, South America, etc. So I think the industry is in a position to need to tell people, yes, CBD is effective, that we think, without making a claim, because let's face it, consumers are very distrustful, but they have seen a 4-year, very effective, very low hospitalization, no fatality response to standard CBD. But the standard CBD they're used to taking is 25, 30 milligrams, which has nothing at all to do with COVID. So I'm hopeful the scientists in our industry, the researchers, the doctors like yourself, can begin to look at dosing as a theoretical piece to claim the CBD effects, the THC effects, the THCA effects, the raw, the acid effects, yet warn the public that you can't get this just online or just over the counter or just in a health food store. But
Thanks for your comment. Thanks for your comment, Lloyd, and thanks for dropping, Dr. Lloyd, pardon me. Thanks for dropping, thanks for joining the conversation. I think what you are addressing specifically, is kind of the ongoing conversation that we're having in, obviously in our scientific advisory committee and separately with other individuals throughout, throughout the industry, which is, how do we get good information? How do we get great research, not only, conceptualized, but then actually executed on such that we can, have actionable items as an industry that we can move forward on, specifically as it pertains to products, as it pertains to ongoing research studies and the like, and specifically when it comes to COVID-19, right? For us as a group, we thanks to Dr. Postolov, we, had this in our conversation at the end of last year in Q4, and she brought it up as, hey, this is something we should look at, and kind of the study that came out or the studies that came out early January were like spearheaded us to, as a group, to really at least address it, right? Address it. Let's talk about a little bit of the research and let's see if we can create some actionable items. But it's an ongoing conversation, Dr. Lloyd. So really, really appreciate them. Appreciate you for joining the conversation and dropping your email for that ongoing conversation as you bring that other perspective. Bryan?
Yeah, fantastic. I know we're right about to hit time. I think that question is probably a fantastic thing to close out today's program on, unless any of the other panelists had any final thoughts that you wanted to leave the audience with before we close out today's broadcast.
Basically, what I want to say that we need more studies to prove that CBD is working, that cannabinoids are working, and not only for COVID, but post-COVID and other conditions. And we're kind on the front line. So I think it's our responsibility to make it happen and speak maybe on bigger symposiums about it and raise this question.
Dr. Layfeld, any final comments?
Yeah, I just want to thank my co-panelists and friends for doing this. I think this was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Just a comment on CBD and dosing, that we were just talking about, is that CBD at different doses has completely different effects on the body. Depending, it can act as something called an agonist in one part of dose, and when it's raised, it's completely different. So it's, again, I think that we can, all of these science webinars, we can all agree on the same thing, in that, again, we need more clinical research in order to really exemplify the benefits of this amazing plant. So thank you for providing this forum for us, Bryan, Brooke, NCIA. Thank you.
Bryan, last thoughts.
Nothing to add. I echo everything that my fellow doctor panelists have said. Appreciate the opportunity to present, and I think this is a great area to continue to monitor. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you in particular, Jim and Paloma, for really spearheading the development of this program. Really fantastic to have you present on the program, Dr. Apostolov. Thank you so much for all of your support of NCIA's efforts over the last few months. And really, really thank you for bringing the regulatory aspect to today's conversation, Bryan. Really appreciated that aspect from Foley Hoek. So really appreciate all of your all's volunteer support and commitment to NCIA's educational efforts over the last year through your participation with the Scientific Advisory Committee. I know a number of people have asked in the chat window and through DMs over the course of the program if they will be provided a copy of today's presentation. Answer is yes. One of our team members will drop a PDF of the actual PowerPoint that we already have compiled for you right now. If you wanted to go back and dive deep into any of that information right after today's program concludes, please do. And then we'll be posting a formatted video recording of today's session on NCIA's YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and our blog, hopefully within the next 72 hours. So stay on the lookout for an email to be sent to all of you all directly that will have direct links, but also make sure to follow NCIA's social feeds and our YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed to everything across the board so you stay up to speed on all of our activities and are the first ones to dive back in today's information. Again, like it says here as well, please don't hesitate to contact any of today's panelists. They'd love to talk with you all more about today's program or any ideas or topics that you all might want to dive deep with them in a future webinar, or perhaps see them showcased at our 8th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo taking place from July 20th through the 22nd. If you've been attending these webinars over the last few weeks, you've known or you've heard me make mention that our call for proposal process was taking place over the month of February. It did just close last night. So all of our committees, and I believe this one in particular, are going to be working over the next few weeks to grade, review, and finalize the agenda for our 8th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo in San Francisco later this summer. I believe there's plans to have a follow-up conversation on today's program in the works. So stay on the lookout for the agenda for our 8th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo to be released in the coming few weeks. And do note that membership grants all of our blooming and evergreen members complimentary access to that event for up to 5 or 7 team members respectively. So membership is a really unbelievable tool to gain access to our network and all of our in-person activities as well. So with that, thank you all so much for participating in the another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar, the very first hosted by the Scientific Advisory Committee in 2022. Like I've made mention the last few weeks, it really feels good to be back engaging with our network in a live format. So I really do hope that you'll continue to engage with all of these interactive educational opportunities throughout the remainder of the year. We do have another webinar scheduled that's going to be hosted by the HR and Retail Committee, taking place on March 16th. So make sure to head to NCIA's website to secure your spot for that. And with that, we'll leave you all with this end of event credit sequence, highlighting all of the member businesses that participated in today's session in particular. If you don't see your company listed here, that just means you need to head to www.thecannabisindustry.org/join following today's program to join the movement for a responsible and equitable cannabis industry. Thank you all so much for participating. Hope you all enjoy my personally produced audio stylings while we're leaving the room. And I will see you all hopefully next week, or actually later this month on the 16th for the next Industry Essentials educational webinar. Thank you all so much. We'll see you then.